are you and your staff really capable of? What will your learners do if you took the governor off and just no brakes, all gas? What would it look like? I think that'd be the ideal. In the last video, we defined the dissonance, some things where there's some friction. But in this video, we want to talk about the ideal. What if you could just go for it? What would it look like? Do you know yet? If you don't, it's worth the time to figure out what your ideal graduate profile would look like. What would your learners think, say, and do if you nailed the ideal? Welcome to PBL Simplified for Leaders, where we're going to take your vision off the page and move it into your school. I'm going to distill leadership ideas from education, business, and sports so that you can up your leadership game to where your school needs you to be. Today, we're talking about defining the ideal. What if you had all the budget? What if you had everybody rowing the same way? What if you had full momentum? Do you know what you do? Do you know what it would look like? You need to take the time to dream. In his book, Unstoppable, Alden Mills looks at this idea of what does it look like when you dream? And he says, most people don't know how to dream. It's this really great parable that he uses ships. I'll probably do a full review on it. But his point really early on is you have to be able to dream. I like this idea from John Maxwell. He's got a chair in his office that's the thinking chair. That's what he does there. Like when he sits in that chair, he's thinking. You need a dreaming chair, my friend. You need to sit down and just dream. What would it look like? And if immediately all the obstacles come up, so I could never do that, or this would never happen, my staff would never be totally on board. If you can't see it, there's no way you can achieve it. You got to define the ideal, and then you need to help your staff do the same. So every visionary leader can define their ideal by looking at what their learners can think, say, and do. And I did this with a group of science teachers. They were middle school science teachers, and we sat down, and I'm the project-based learning guy, so I'm supposed to bring them project-based learning. These are high-flying middle school science teachers, right? They're doing labs, like they're in the scientific method, like they're probably really close to PBL to start with. But what you find is that sometimes we get so into the weeds of standards and helping kids move just a little bit that we miss the big picture of what we want our learners to actually do. And then a lot of times that's actually changing how they think. So I posed this question. I said, if your learners were going to move on to the next level, high school, how do you want them to think like scientists? And they got to brainstorm a little bit. We wrote them down. First, we shouted a couple out, said, yep. Then they worked individually. We brought them all back. What do you really want learners to leave as scientists? You want them to be able to think about a problem and then think about a solution. You want them to understand that you have to isolate some variables to figure out what's really happening, not just in an experiment, but in their lives. Like sometimes we know our learners, like things aren't working in their life. So they try to fix all these different variables at the same time. And so the science teachers went down this vein. Said, okay, this is a great list that we have. If your learners left 8th grade, went into high school and life with this list of thinking like a scientist, how would you feel about that? Oh, that'd be great. We'd love that. Okay. If you look at your coursework, if you look at your syllabus, how many of the things you're doing are intentionally leading your learners towards these main ideas? Like we found out right away that we were attacking these little standards, but we weren't looking big picture. Are we leading our learners in the direction we want them to go so they become the people that we think they can become? Where they have more opportunities and more light bulb moments? Are we getting them to think differently? And it changed the way these science teachers looked at their curriculum and their year. Did they completely change everything? No, but they had new glasses on. Now they were looking to see how can we change mindsets because that's more important than standards mastery. Did they still have quarterly assessments? Yes, of course they did. Did they still address standards, engage standards, have quizzes and tests? Yes, of course they did. But now they had this bigger view of what is it that we want our learners to think about as they move forward as scientists in the world. Another way to get at this is to ask your teachers to say, what do we want our learners to say? What are some words we want them to be saying? Because they don't always say what we want them to say. And it's a really neat exercise. Eventually, you come up with how can we get them to be more polite? How can they ask about others? How can they have empathy? How can they ask really great questions? You say, we'll never get them to do these things. But I would push back on that. Right after that, what are some small ways that we can help our learners start to say the things that they should be saying as learners and productive citizens? We could ask them to turn in questions instead of answers. That would be neat. What if they started turning in some questions because that's important to us? If questions are important to us, they'll be important to our learners. What if we had them turn in questions instead of answers? That'd be really neat. And start to change what it is that they say. What is it we want them to do as they leave our schools? And there are multiple things you want them to do, right? If they're going to head on to college, you want them to be able to write a lot of words. Like that's a standards-based piece that we need our learners to be able to do. You have to write a lot of words. You have to read a lot of words. And we want them to do things like explore new ideas. We want them to do quick prototypes. We want them to do instead of just sit passively. Yeah, those are a lot of the things that are actually under our control. But if we don't put our heads up out of the standards trench, sometimes we can miss those. So we take time out, give our staff time to think about these things. They're not going to scrap everything they do. That's not what we're doing with project-based learning. What we're doing with project-based learning is we're repurposing things and moving inquiry right to the front, doing authentic work right to the front, throughout, reflection throughout. As you start to bring these things in, you start to find these are the ideal qualities we want our graduates to have. So you can run an ideal graduate protocol, which is really looking at these 3 ideas with your staff. You can have them do it in small groups on big pieces of chart paper. They can do it in small groups. You can post those. You can keep them up. And what is it's pretty rare that somebody puts slope intercept form in there or complex sentences, right? Like these standards that we often fight over and say these kids have to learn these things. When it comes down to it, those standards are vehicles for us to teach other things. And your educators likely agree with that. So as you do the ideal graduate, they're likely moving right in the direction of your vision. Remember, the purpose of PBL Simplified Leadership Series is to take your vision off the paper and bring it into your school. This is one way to show your staff that dissonance, that little bit of friction of, hey, we want this, but we're doing this. How do we get these 2 things closer? And that's going to be your vision. And they're going to start moving into your vision. So use the ideal graduate as a way to spark some momentum towards your vision. These ideal graduates are out there. There are some that are posted publicly out there that different schools have run these with, and they run them well. But again, if it gets stuck on a one-pager, it's not going to do you any good. But if you can use it as momentum and connect it to your vision, it can be very powerful. So you have to define your ideal. If you don't, it's pretty unlikely that you'll get there. So take the time to do that today. Take the time to hit that subscribe button as well so you can continue to get this PBL leadership series right into your suggestions. And you also might want to share this with a colleague. Be that leader that's very generous with your good resources. And often you see that come right back to you. Thank you for subscribing and sharing. Thank you for diving into this work so that you can engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms. Go lead, inspire.